Welcome, Mr. Najma Minhas with Global Village Space. I'm joined today with Mr. Tabish Gauhar, who is the Prime Minister's Special Assistant on Power and Petroleum. Tabish, thank you so much for joining me today and giving us some time.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Tabish, I'd like to start off with the big issue in circular debt, which is the big issue in the power sector, which is the circular debt. We're hearing that right now the estimated number is around rupees 2.2 trillion, and that if we do nothing by 2023, it's going to reach 4.4 trillion. What is the issue? Can you break down power sector for us in easy ways so that we can all understand what is going on there?
I think there's no particular easy way to explain the circular debt issue that we confront right now. But to put it as simplistically as possible is what I call the tsunami of new contracted capacity that we have inherited,
right,
which is, at least in my mind, 25% more expensive than they could have been, and at least 40 to 50% more than our requirement.
Okay.
And to rub salt to the wound, they are front loaded, which means that the average tariff for the first 10 years is twice that of the remaining 15 years of the contracts. So the tsunami of contracted capacity that we have inherited, that has hit us in the recent past, has not been commensurate with the increase in demand. Now, why the demand hasn't grown as much is a result of several factors. One of which obviously is the slowdown in the economy over the last 2 years or so. That has picked up in the recent past. But clearly COVID did not help, where there was suppression of demand. So if you think about it from an arithmetic standpoint, there is the numerator, which is the cost, and then you have the denominator, which is the demand. The numerator kept increasing and the demand wasn't increasing as much.
Right.
So the average rate of electricity, which is the rupees per kilowatt hour, kept increasing. Now, if you're living in a political economy, clearly you can't just pass that on to the consumer. It is very easy for people to say that the true cost of service should be recovered from the end consumers.
Right.
But if it is not aligned with the purchasing power of your consumer, and that could be domestic, industrial, commercial, so on, the government is forced to park a portion of that tariff elsewhere, which is called the circular debt, which is the burden on the national economy that at the end of the day that you got to pay for. But that is the cost that you're not passing on to the consumer and or not subsidizing.
So the basic reason for the circular debt, you're saying, is because we have too much capacity, we don't have enough demand, and therefore we're left with this overhang of amount that we have to pay back to the IPPs, because we can't give it to our consumers.
Exactly, because the contracts are on take or pay. So regardless of our need or usage, we got to pay for that cost or capacity throughout the year. So unless and until the demand grows, in line with the increase in capacity, the circular debt issue won't go away.
So you're talking about amount of capacity, and my understanding is right now in Pakistan we have around 38,000 megawatts capacity, installed capacity, but we've got around 3,000 to 4,000 additional coming online. So is there anything we can do about the additional not coming online? Okay,
good question. Our nameplate capacity might be 38,000 megawatts, but our derated capacity is about 32,000 megawatts or thereabouts. Now, what is worrisome for us is the list of committed projects that are in the pipeline, which are either under construction or have attained financial close or have been issued letters of support. So they are at a stage where they can't be rolled back. And you might be surprised to hear that that list is almost 87 additional projects worth 23,000 megawatts. Additional 23,000 megawatts. So
on top of the current 32,000 that you're referring to, we have another 23,000 coming online.
Another 23,000 megawatts.
In the next how many years?
In next 10 years.
Okay.
So between now and 2029, we'll have 23,000 megawatts. Now we're going to retire about 7,000 megawatts in the same time period.
Okay.
Half of which is our old government-owned plants that are inefficient, that have been around since 1960s. Those are being shut down. Half of those have been shut down. The remaining half will be shut down by next year. And the older IPPs, for example, Hub Power, which is the first IPP in Pakistan. Now, HUBCO is an illustrative case where we are paying them almost 30 billion rupee a year in capacity charges on a take or pay basis. But we dispatch them less than 1% of the time during the year. So
Okay.
it's idle capacity that we are paying for. But their contract won't expire till 2026 or 2027,
Okay.
right? So that's the issue, that we have idle capacity. But when the contract expires, we're not going to renew it. In
Okay.
fact, what we are working on right now is on a proposal to buy out all the furnace oil fired
Okay.
IPPs which are not being dispatched
Okay.
on an NPV basis. So as opposed to paying them, say, 400 billion rupee over the next 6-7 years, we pay them half of that amount,
Right.
and retire them, take them out of the system, take them out of the tariff, so that your bill is reduced at the end of the
These
day.
are the furnace oil plants under the 1994
These are all
policy.
the furnace oil plants.
Okay.
There are about 11 in
Okay.
number, about 3,500
Right.
megawatts in
Right.
total. Correct.
And how much of the circular debt are you hoping to reduce by this particular policy?
This particular policy again will reduce it by about 200 billion rupee or
Okay.
thereabouts. But the plan that we have, which is very holistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to be a very ambitious man and say to you that we want to reduce the flow of circular debt, the increase in circular debt to zero by
Right.
2023, 2024.
Because at this moment, if you just reduce by 200 billion, I just did a quick calculation, you're left with 1.9 trillion left.
Yeah, so it's a big mountain to
Right.
climb, right? So the do nothing scenario is, suppose we were not to renegotiate any of these IPPs, suppose the demand were not to grow any further, suppose we were not in a position to subsidize more, the circular debt would indeed double over the next 2 to 3 years. And that's
Right.
the headline that you often
Right.
read in the newspaper, the circular debt projected to double in the next
Right.
2 to 3 years. But we obviously can't afford a status quo scenario. So there are three things that we can do. One is that we already embarked on renegotiating the contracts. Now there's a flip side of the coin, which is that these are sovereign guarantee backed contracts. So you're definitely affecting investor sentiment. These are contracts that are supposed to be signed and sealed,
Right.
but
So
we
you
now
have to
but we have
implement
told the
those.
investors that we don't like to do this, but
Okay.
we're doing it because the sector is unsustainable.
Right.
And of course, tongue in cheek, you've made a lot of money, now about
Right.
time you give
Right.
something back.
Right.
And that includes some of the recently signed contracts which have geostrategic significance for
Right.
Pakistan as well.
Right.
So obviously renegotiating the signed and sealed contracts is part and parcel of the equation.
Have they agreed? Because that was one thing I wanted to know about, that because these are very recent contracts, but we have a very good relationship with China under CPEC. I mean, is this something that they're considering about maybe renegotiating, reprofiling some of their debt?
So as
Extending it out rather than upfront loading it, like
Yes.
you mentioned?
So all of the IPPs that came before the 2015 policy, right, have been renegotiated.
Okay.
And the impact of that would be almost 770 billion rupee over the next 20 years.
Okay.
So that's reasonably significant, right? Of course, they made.
So when you've renegotiated them, you've changed the terms of the contracts?
Yes, so we reduced their rate of return on their
Okay.
equity. We have asked them to share their upside on operational maintenance cost,
Okay.
on their plant heat rate, which is the efficiency,
Right.
reduce the operational maintenance cost as well, and so on and
Okay.
so forth. So every
Okay.
IPP is kind of distinct,
Right.
but the net result
Is
is about
700 billion.
770
Okay.
billion. And also we have waived off close to 140 billion rupee of liability that was on us on account of other invoices that they had raised against us,
Okay.
and arbitration awards that had gone
Right,
against us.
right.
So we renegotiated those, did the out of court settlement, and saved what I believe is about 140 billion
Okay.
to the national exchequer.
Right.
So that's the pre-2015. With regard the 2015, that includes the CPEC, but not all of them are CPEC. Because they are the recent entrants, we obviously have to tread carefully, and I must add here that the Chinese came and invested in our power sector when nobody else did.
Right.
So I think as a nation we are
Sure.
hugely indebted to them.
Yep.
And the fact that we gave them a tariff that they accepted alongside others is a tariff that we gave them, we offered, and,
Right.
and they took
So
that
it's
offer.
an internal question regarding the levels of those tariffs.
It's an internal question for us, a bit of soul searching
why-
for
why
ourselves as
those
to
happen.
why a 1300 megawatt coal fired plant costed, in our assumptions, $2 billion when
Right.
it could have been done at
Right.
$1.5 billion.
Right,
That's the
right.
soul searching for us. Or the
I
fact
mean, you
that
mentioned this in an article I saw recently you wrote in the news, where you mentioned that, you know, the recent contracts that we signed in 2015 were exponentially more expensive than they needed to be.
I believe so as a professional.
Right.
And again, you can say that because our risk premium as a country is so high, that's why those contracts were on the high side from a pricing standpoint. But I would still argue that from a sustainability standpoint, if I'm an investor, and I've been an investor my entire life, minus the last 8 months here as a public servant, you do look at the affordability of the economy. And I think that's where the investors, I believe, could have been a bit more discreet about it.
What have they agreed to do then?
So what they are saying to us is that, look, we understand the issue. We want to help.
Right.
It may not be the same cookie cutter approach that you had with the other IPPs.
Right.
We'll help you in some other way so that you reduce the burden. What I mean by that is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, is absolutely adamant, and it is a direct instruction to us that he does not want to increase the tariff beyond the rate that they are at.
To the consumer.
To the consumer. So that's where we start off from, right?
Okay.
So whatever we do outside the box has to result in a reduction in tariff, right? Now, if you don't want to reopen the contracts, right, which they don't want us to do, because quite frankly, and I say it publicly, the Chinese are very concerned that anything we do, if it falls or it's aligned with the narrative that the West has built against their investment under the Belt and Road Initiative in developing markets, allegedly trapping us in debt and so on, which is not the case. That we don't believe in that. But they're sensitive to that, and I think we have to be mindful of that fact. So whatever relief that they can provide to us, maybe it's in a form that we are able to provide more subsidy to our consumers.
Okay.
At the end of the day, we are still providing subsidy to our electricity consumers and gas consumers. So if there is an amount of capital that they can make available to us over the next 3 years or 5 years, so I'll just give you a statistic.
So if are they saying that they might help you financially?
That is the intention, right?
And
or that's our desire.
Assuming if that happens, where do you intend to use the money? Is that going to go to pay off the circular debt?
So if I reduce the stock of the circular debt, that doesn't help you as a consumer, because that's parked anyway, right? That you've already paid for, you're not going to pay for. You're paying a portion of that in terms of interest cost thereon, but it's not a huge amount. What we are really trying to achieve is to reduce the flow, the increase in circular debt, which if we are unable to arrest, right, will go straight to your electricity bill. Right? So whatever shape or form they adopt in terms of providing relief to the power sector has to be measured in dollars and cents.
Right.
We can plow that back into the electricity bill by giving more subsidy to our consumers. So at the end of the day, the Ministry of Finance, Shaukat Tareen, has a finite pool of capital. We've asked for a subsidy of 500 billion rupee next year in the budget. We hope to get it. I mean, we'll see what the budget says on 11th of June. But if we can get another pot or pocket of capital, right, from outside the federal budget, we can use that to reduce the tariff for our consumer, so that he or she doesn't have to pay more going forward.
So you're basically going to use the money that they give us to help consumers today, but our children might end up having to pay higher rates later on.
Well, that's a good question, and again, if I had my wish, I mean, it would be in the form of a grant, but I don't think life is so good. It will be in the form of a long-term soft loan, right?
Okay, so let's take.
So we are in a way pushing the can down the road. Your point is absolutely valid, but at the end of the day, there is a concept of time value of money, and the Prime Minister said, look, if we have another 2 years, 5 years to stabilize the economy, to grow it further, we'll hopefully be earning enough to be able to pay back that loan, even if it means paying a bit more.
I'd like to ask you about the fact that you have not done financial close with all these IPPs. And all these contracts have been signed under something called take or pay contract, which means that even if we don't take the electricity from the IPP, we still as a government have to pay them.
Correct.
Can we not change those into take and pay, which is that only if I take your electricity, I pay. And those IPs then told, well, you can go out in the market and sell your electricity to whoever you want.
Yes.
I mean, that is what, I'm from the UK, and that is what we did in the UK. And coincidentally, in the 90s, I was working on electricity deregulation in the UK. And this is what was all the fashion, right? You deregulated the market and you said there should be lots of sellers and there should be lots of buyers. and sellers can sell to whoever they want, but they take the risk. I, as a government, no longer take that risk.
Correct.
For the people of Pakistan, isn't that better, that you as a government, you move out of that market and you give the risk to the IPPs?
So that's part of our deal with the 35 odd IPPs that
Okay.
have signed the master agreement with us, where we have said that once the electricity commodity market, which we call CTBCM,
Okay.
is operationalized by the end of this year, if not by the end of the year, by Q1 2022, they should be in a position to find their own buyers and relieve us of the burden of the take or
So
pay.
you are initiating that idea?
We already initiated that.
Okay.
But if you are a recipient of a sovereign guarantee, right, and if you believe that you will not be able to find buyers at the price that you are able to sell, right, you won't leave the contract.
Of
so we
course.
can't force them out. Otherwise, it will be a
But
breach of
those that
contract.
want to get out of the contract, are you enabling them to,
Absolutely,
yes, please
yes.
go?
So the electricity commodity market, which should be operationalized, is actually a work in progress, and there's a lot of work. In fact, as you and I are talking, there's a meeting going on exactly on that subject.
Okay.
It's a weekly meeting. It will be a multi-seller, multi-buyer model, where on a business-to-business basis. In the first instance, we are liberalizing the wholesale market.
Okay.
We define that as a bulk power consumer
Okay.
who is 1 megawatt and above. So that
Okay.
you won't qualify that for that as
Okay.
a domestic consumer, but we will move to a retail
Okay.
liberalization in next 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
The other thing that is happening in our sector, which I think the government doesn't get enough credit for, because I would say as a pure technocrat,
Right.
that this government has done more heavy lifting on the reform than any other government that
Right.
has preceded it, is that the exclusivity of the distribution companies would be expiring in 2022 and 2023, which
Okay.
means that as a consumer, just like in the UK,
Right.
you will have a choice of supplier. So if you're not
Right.
happy with
Yes.
Hesco,
You
you can
switch
pick up
over.
the phone and get somebody else to be a supplier.
Right.
The wire will still be owned by Hesco,
Okay.
but the electron could be somebody else's. It doesn't have to
Okay.
be Hesco, right? And he can offer you a better rate, better customer service, and so on and so forth. So we are definitely moving in that direction. So next year it will be wholesale.
Okay.
In 3 to 5 years, if we're still around, it will be at the retail level.
Okay.
And the distribution company will lose the exclusive monopolies as well. So
Okay.
we're definitely moving in that direction.
So on the distribution companies, I wanted to say this is the second big element that people talk about when they refer to the circular debt. My understanding is that the losses from transmission and distribution and the lack of recovery amounts to around 400 billion rupees, which is around 17% of the whole circular debt. What are you looking at doing in that field?
So the number is
It differs.
it differs by disco, of course. The ones that are primarily
Yes,
in
so I read
Punjab,
Hesco is 28% line losses, Pesco is 35%,
Yes.
and IESCO, thank God in Islamabad, is only 8%. The
So-
average is 17%.
So the distribution companies where previous governments haven't invested enough, right, are the ones that are really bleeding cash, right?
What do you mean they haven't invested enough?
So you obviously there's a technical loss and there's a non-technical loss,
Okay.
right? So if you have an outdated, dilapidated transmission distribution infrastructure, a lot of electrons get lost from a technical standpoint. So we
Right.
haven't invested. Then of course there is the commercial loss, which is primarily referred to as theft,
Right.
or more importantly, non-payment of bills, right? Now of course there are socio-economic reasons. They are the ground realities that exist in places like Quetta, Hyderabad, Sakkar, Peshawar, in tribal areas that we are all familiar with, right?
Right.
There's a technical solution to that requires money. For instance, if we have a
Smart
lot of
metering.
money where we can have automatic meter
Yeah.
infrastructure, prepaid meters, so on, where we can disconnect
Right.
sitting here, for instance,
Yep.
that would solve part of the problem. But again, at the
What
end of the
percentage
day,
of the problem would it solve?
I would say almost 50% of the problem would be that, right?
Okay.
But the issue here is, and again, I'll be a bit technical here, there is an allowance that is built into the tariff, which is passed on to the regularly paying and honest consumer, which is about 13.5%. So the regulator allows us a 13.5% line loss allowance.
Okay.
Over and above that is the loss that goes to our bottom line, right, in the electric sector. That number is actually not a very big number. That's about 4% or thereabouts. And that's about 30 to 40 billion rupee. The big loss is on the collection, where the regulator assumes that you're going to recover 100 cents to a dollar. So every bill is recovered. Now in a place like Pakistan, that's just not going to happen ever.
Okay.
Maybe even in the UK, there's a point something percent
Right.
loss of revenue. And a developing market like ours, where we are at 90%.
Okay.
And that's the big loss. That's about 150 billion rupees. So the total losses, which you call AT&C losses, about 175 to 200 billion rupees. That's the correct figure.
Okay.
But the important point I think we need to recognize is, and it's not something to be happy about, but it's a point to be recognized, that over the last 2.5 years or so, or 3 years, this government, we've had to increase electricity prices by about 40%.
Right.
For the reason that I outlined right at the outset, right? Because of the tsunami of new capacity charge and so on and so forth. The devaluation of the rupee versus the dollar and so on.
Right.
Despite that, I think we have, as a whole, maintained our transmission distribution loss at about 17.5%, actually marginally improved, and the losses at about, collection ratio at about 90%.
Right.
So despite the increase in tariff, which would have meant an increase in losses, we've kept it constant. Now, the next solution, and the real solution, is to, as you might ask yourself, is why is it still in the public domain? Why aren't we not privatizing, right? And again, there are examples all over the world where you hand over the management control to a private sector, things do improve, right? And we have decided now, the cabinet has approved the appointment of a transaction advisor to hand over the management control of all these discos that are in the public sector right now to private sector over the next 2 to 3 years. So that decision has been taken. It will be met with stiff resistance. We know that. We're not selling the assets. We're not selling the shares in these companies, and we have promised not to lay off workers.
You are just bringing in private management.
We're bringing in private management, and we're asking them to invest.
How is this different from the KE model? I mean, you have been CEO of Karachi Electric as well, 2010, I think you mentioned. How is this going to be different from the KE model?
Because KE, of course, is an integrated utility company. It does generation, transmission, distribution. Think of WAPDA, mini WAPDA. It was privatized as a whole, which I recently said, in hindsight, was a policy mistake. It should have been unbundled and handed over to more than one private party. But there, in that transaction, in 2005, 66% of the shares were offloaded and given to a private sector consortium. Right here, we're not selling any shares. All we are saying is, okay, we're going to give you the management control of the business. We're going to retain 100% ownership of the assets and shares and so on. And in the Punjab-based discos, we expect them to invest also from their own balance sheet and earn a return on that, which is going to be regulated by NERA. And in the more loss-making distribution company, where we know they will probably not invest, we will find the money, but they will be
Where will you find the money from? You don't have any money.
No, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of capital available from the likes of Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, even the Chinese.
So you'll be tapping into different organizations.
So the issue for us is, if we just put in money, not our own money, but borrowed money, and in the same setup, it will get lost and you won't get the payback that we need.
When do you see this happening? Because yesterday, for example, Hesco, there was a strike there because of the thought that a new CEO was coming. The workers were on strike because they thought Hesco was about to be privatized. You've been at KE during a period of time where I remember I was in Karachi. There were shootings all the time in KE. People were on the streets protesting against what was happening in KE. Although now it's supposed to be a relatively efficient company compared to everything else. But how possible is it going to be for you to undergo these reforms in the discos? So
that's a challenge, and time will tell whether we stay the course on that. The Prime Minister is absolutely clear that we need to fix the distribution sector. We already appointed new boards. If you look at the profile of the new board of directors, directors on the board, they're all from the private sector. The chairmen are all from the industry, and I would put my hand on my heart and tell you that it was a completely transparent process. The same boards have now identified new chief executives. The first test case was Hesco. There was a protest by employees. It was taken care of. Today, the gentleman has assumed charge. And we expect the same process to continue. So, of course, we are going to face a lot of resistance to change. Every time you disturb the status quo, the resistance is inevitable, right? And if you can manage the political downside of that, which the Prime Minister is absolutely clear that he will, because he is trying to introduce structural reform in the sector. So when he talks about building 10 dams over the next 10 years, I mean, our term is going to expire in 2023, and then the people of Pakistan will elect whoever they want to. But we are working as hard on the Daima Basha Dam, which is going to be operationalized in 2029, as we are on a project that's going to be operational.
So I know we're talking about distribution, but when the Prime Minister said this, the first thing that came to my mind is we're already crying about the fact that we have too much installed capacity. Why are we building 10 more dams then?
I think that's an issue of water security as well, and it's also, and that's primarily the reason. Electricity is a byproduct of that, right? And of course, we want to replace the older, more expensive, dirtier sources of electricity with cleaner and cheaper, right? And again, as you know, we have a target of 60% renewable energy by 2030, which we're going to achieve. It will be almost 45% hydro and 15% would be wind, solar and bagasse. We also have nuclear, which of course doesn't classify as clean energy, but it doesn't pollute the environment. We have K2 that was just recently inaugurated. We have K3 coming. But the issue is the same, right? So K2 is going to cost us 100 billion rupee a year in capacity charge. K3 another 100 billion. The HVDC, the Lahore-Matiari line, that's 50 billion rupee of take-or-pay charge. The whole of NTDC network is also 50 billion rupees. So you think about it and put it in perspective, the entire transmission network Pakistan costs you as a consumer 50 billion rupee a year on it. And one line, HVDC, Lahore to Matiari, is also costing us 50 billion rupee. That's why when you say it was front-loaded, it was more expensive than they could have been.
So that's where I want to ask you about demand, right? You said that demand and increasing demand is a crucial component of helping to get rid of the circular debt. What are you working on in that front? Because one of the things that a lot of people mentioned is that I've heard people come on TV saying that why doesn't the government sell us cheaper electricity? Because by selling cheaper electricity, you already have capacity payments that you have to make. Why not sell the electricity cheaper to industry rather than for us to pay no automatic capacity payments?
So we did that in November last year, and we offered a discount of between 25 to 50%, 25% to the big boys and 50% to the SME. And I'm talking about the industrial customers here. And the results have been very impressive. We've seen a 15% month-on-month increase so far. So that experiment has worked, where if you offer them concession on incremental usage, the industry responds to that price signal and the demand has gone up. So that's on.
So are you going to continue that model?
Because so it is.
Our electricity is more expensive in Pakistan to industry than it is in India or Pakistan. Or I mean, I read in somewhere Pakistan is 16 cents for every kilowatt hour in a PIDE study, versus Bangladesh and India, which have 11 cents, and Sri Lanka, which only has 7 cents for industry. So, I mean, doesn't it make sense that, I mean, this also fits in with Shaukat Tareen coming in, finance minister, saying we want to grow as an economy. If we're going to grow, we need to help our industry. So have we thought about maybe providing cheap electricity to SEZs, specialized economic zones, industry in general? I mean, are these kind of policies that you're thinking about?
So the policy that is in vogue right now, that is across the board. Of course, that's on incremental. For the exporters, what I refer to as zero rated. That's about 4,000 odd, right? We are providing them electricity at 9 cents, fixed rate, to help with our exports. It used to be 7.5 cents, but we are now providing them at 9 cents, and that policy will continue in the next year as well and beyond. And even the incremental usage subsidy, what we call the industrial support package, will continue till October 2023. So they have visibility on the pricing. So on the industrial side, and same for the special economic zone, we are going to offer them cheap electricity at a price that will make them competitive. The issue with the industries has been, and that's a historical fact, that they used to cross-subsidize the domestic population, right? The domestic consumers. So the reason why electricity has been more expensive than Vietnam or Bangladesh or India is because those poor guys were subsidizing the poor folk on the street, right? As far as their electricity. The industries were. So they were cross-subsidizing the domestic consumer.
Poor people exist in Bangladesh. So why was industry there so much still cheaper than?
Because
unless their government's not helping the poor people.
In Bangladesh, the gas cost is quite low, and in Pakistan, in the recent past, last 5 years, we're importing our LNG, which is probably 2 times the expensive of the gas that they're getting in Bangladesh, right? So, if you're going to charge the true cost of service or product, right, it is going to make our industries more uncompetitive. So we are subsidizing on the gas side by providing them with that commodity at $6.50, although we are importing at about $10 on average. So that's the subsidy. That's
Right.
about 40 billion rupee a year.
Okay, but
And
now
on-
you've said to a lot of these industry who've actually what we call captive power generation, right? So at one point in the 2012 to 15, we had too much load shedding. Everybody was encouraged, government encouraged all these textile companies and various other companies, cement companies, set up your own plants. So they all went ahead, set up their plants, and you gave them cheap gas. And you're telling me now that you're helping them because you gave them that cheap gas. But at the same time, now you're saying we're going to stop that gas giving, and therefore they need to move to the grid. So how are you intending to help them as an industry?
That's a policy that was approved by the cabinet in February this year, and I do appreciate the fact that it has been a bone of contention between us and captive power users, who have, as you rightly pointed out, said that the state of Pakistan encouraged us to go captive, and there was less supply vis-a-vis demand, right,
At the time,
several
yeah.
years ago. Now we have excess capacity. What we are saying to them, or what you say to them, is that you've got to be part of the solution. If you want a better price,
Right.
we are willing to come to the table and talk about that. So we're not going to make you uncompetitive. But please come back onto the grid, because we need you. We need to increase the denominator. The more industrial consumers we have in our mix, the lower the tariff is going to be for the economy as a whole. My argument with our industrial friends has always been that you cannot operate in an island, right, which is surrounded by a sea of chaos.
Okay.
If the whole power sector and the economy as a result is
Right.
under serious stress because of the circular debt and because of the rising price of electricity, you can't be isolated. So we are guaranteeing you supply. They of course care about the quality of supply, about the frequency and voltage fluctuation. We can fix that. There's a technical solution to that. In terms of pricing, we can fix that as well. But they have invested in those captive units, so it's a sunk cost for them. And I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, if you look at it holistically, as a policy maker, we look at the big picture. And we say, okay, you might be a loser from your own individual P&L standpoint,
Right.
but I'm looking at the P&L of the whole sector and of the whole economy. And if it's a common good, then you got to play your role as well.
So I want to ask you, you mentioned that, and in your article also you mentioned that the last government was very much responsible because they left PTI in a very bad economy, and that the economy also devalued, and that's one of the major reasons for the circular debt. That devaluations happened significantly under PTI. So do you not hold your own government responsible for that as well?
So our narrative on that is that the rupee was artificially overvalued and kept at that level.
But that narrative aside, the reality is that the reason why the circular debt has jumped so much is because of the devaluation of around 45%.
It has contributed because a significant proportion of our energy cost, right, is dollar denominated. I mean, the rupee was probably 110 rupee in 2018. It is 155 now, because that reflects the true value of our currency vis-a-vis demand, given our economic dynamics and our fundamentals. So we let the rupee trade at a level which is true, right? Previously, we believed that it was artificially kept inflated, and obviously, so you were in a way kicking the can down the road and deferring the inevitable. That was bound to happen. Right? So, I mean, it's a question of macroeconomics, and I am no macroeconomist, right? But clearly, when the rupee devalues, the price of RLNG goes up, the price of other fuels go up, and the fact that a lot of our capacity payments are dollar denominated, including return on equity and the foreign loans that were used to finance those projects, means that the tariff on a quarterly basis is adjusted to account for rupee devaluation. Now, the rupee has been stable for the last few weeks and months. We're very happy about that, and I hope
we are as well.
we hope it stays at that level and the economy keeps growing, and you won't have that impact going forward. But that initial devaluation, we believe, was a result of the imprudent economic policies adopted by the previous government.
Okay, so the final question on something slightly different. Prince Mohammed bin Salman came to Pakistan. We did some MOUs on Saudi setting up an oil refinery. What has happened on that front? Because it's gone quite quiet.
Yeah, not a lot has happened on that, but the refinery project that is more advanced is the Parco Coastal Refinery, which is a joint venture of the government of Pakistan and Abu Dhabi. We would very much welcome the participation of Saudi Aramco in that particular project. I believe, looking at the fundamentals, we don't need two refineries. We don't need two 300,000 barrels per day deep conversion refining alongside a petrochemical project. In fact, I was with the UAE ambassador this morning, and I asked him, would you be interested in partnering with Aramco? And again, I have no mandate from Aramco, but this is me
testing the waters.
Testing the waters, thinking out loud with him. And he said, absolutely, we've done that in India. Why can't we do it here, right?
Yep.
So we're just rolling out a new refining policy under which we are going to give incentives to our existing refinery, which are about 5, to upgrade and modernize their product slate to produce Euro 5 compliant diesel and motor gasoline, to reduce the furnace oil content in their product slate, and also encourage greenfield refineries such as the one that you referred to from Aramco or Mubadala via the Parco platform. So the country definitely needs to have one additional mega refinery, which is deep conversion, which basically means you produce very little furnace oil, because demand for furnace oil is almost non-existent now. We need more diesel, we need more petrol, and that demand is definitely increasing. And to reduce our import burden of refined products, we should have a refinery in Pakistan. We should have a refining industry in Pakistan.
Tabish, what legacy do you intend to leave behind in this division?
Well, the Prime Minister is absolutely clear that he wants to reform and restructure the energy sector on a sustainable basis. So even if we have to take politically difficult decisions, right, which would annoy a lot of vested interest, right, if we can put our sector on a basis where the price of the commodity, whether it's petrol, diesel or electricity, is affordable for our economy in terms of our purchasing power, and if you take a few steps in that right direction, I'd be a very happy man that I've
Do you intend to bring in more market forces into the
Absolutely.
segment?
We believe in deregulation, so does the Prime Minister, but as you know, there have been recent crises, including one in the petroleum sector, where there is a lot of people who don't trust the private sector in terms of the propensity to collude and the lack of capacity of our regulatory agencies such as OGRA, NEPRA, Competition Commission of Pakistan and our provincial authorities to make sure that the customer is not being fleeced. So I'm a huge believer in deregulation. There is no reason why the Prime Minister of Pakistan has to set petrol and diesel price every 14 days or 15 days. It doesn't make sense.
No sense.
Let the market decide, right? And let the regulatory agencies make sure that the price is adequate, is the right one, right? But I think deregulation will take another 3 to 5 years, in my view.
Thank you so much for your time today, Tabish.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me.